there's neo-Nazi contingents there, without a doubt. I mean, there's also neo-Nazis in Russia.
I think I've met, while I was there, I met a lot of soldiers. I think I met one that I know for sure is a Nazi. Now, if you want to talk about Ukraine, the last time we talked, it was I was still in Ukraine, I believe, and this was before the liberation of Kherson. This is a kind of like correlated with the midterms, and I don't feel like it got the amount of attention it deserved because it was so rapid. It happened so quick, just like it was like months of fighting for like inches, and then like in 3 days they just took everything. And the amount of like images and amazing feedback that I've gotten from people now like liberating Kherson and families that are reuniting, I think this really shows like the impact that aid can have. Because the large reason why the Russians had to abandon Kherson and they didn't even fight for it after claiming it was going to be like their next Stalingrad or whatever was because American provided rockets screwed up their logistics so poorly that it was impossible for them to transport goods over the river without using a ferry, which slowed down the whole process. And so I view this as largely an achievement not only of Ukraine but of the international support to Ukraine. And so I want to ask people, and I want to ask you, Matt, looking at Ukraine's position now, what I look at this war kind of like, okay, Ukraine has a real chance of winning. We should fight it to win. And once all like those avenues are you know, thoroughly burnt up, then we'll say, okay, let's negotiate and see what we can get if they're not willing to give us everything and we've tried everything else. Why do you think there's so much pushback against that idea, that the idea of Ukraine fighting a war to win? Because it feels like there's a lot of people who are really scared of that idea. People are scared of Ukraine winning.
I think it's you know, I don't know. I don't know what's going on there. I think it's an easy way, I guess, to attack Democrats because they are the ones who have the White House and are funding the aiding the, you know, sending over the aid to Ukraine. Previous beef maybe between Trump and Zelensky. Maybe they place blame on Ukraine for some of Trump's problems over the years. I don't quite know why they're so, because it doesn't make any sense, like you said, to leave now when Ukraine is winning, right? Like that doesn't make any sense.
I mean,
because it's not like the war ends. It's on Russia to end the war. It's their war. They're the invaders. They can leave and end the war, period. War over. But if we leave Ukraine hanging, then Russia will come in. And again, I've always said this too for people who are on the fence about this stuff. Like, you don't gotta do this for the Ukrainian government. Think about all the innocent people who live in Ukraine who will be brutalized and who will lose their home. And it's not like Russia just takes over and it's just a name change. You don't think there's going to be hell to pay for the Ukrainian citizens if Russia was to win this war? My heart goes out to the people who were involved in this in both Ukraine and Russia, the poor Russian citizens who have no part in this, who are suffering due to various reasons, whether it be getting drafted into this or how sanctions hurt them. I mean, they're the ones who are hurting. But again, the only way to stop this is for Russia to say no more. Ukraine says no more, and Russia continues with their invasion. Russia says no more, goes back to Russia, leaves Ukraine, war over. There's nothing left to do.
The thing that gets me about this specifically is a lot of people seem to be under the impression that if fighting was to stop now, then that means the violence is over. Like, we just need to get a ceasefire, and then everybody will be better because nobody's suffering and dying. And I think this is a failure on two reasons. The first reason is the Russians have used ceasefires before to prepare to be in a better position and then use it. And if there's anything the Russians need right now, it's time. They need time to fix their logistics. They need times to train soldiers that are poorly trained, being sent to the front line. They need to get supplies, which, to be quite frank, a lot of these soldiers are having to go out and buy their own medical supplies, or having to go out and buy literal fucking tampons to pad wounds because they don't have the correct equipment. They're getting rusty AKs. These are all problems they need to address. They have morale issues that need to be addressed. They need to switch out soldiers who have been on the front line for already 8 months, and like their mental fatigue is just too hard, the war fatigue. There's so many things that Russia needs to address, and a ceasefire right now that would not guarantee a peace deal and guarantee Ukrainian territorial sovereignty and like safety into the future really is doing nothing but you're kicking the can down the road. And so if you don't resolve this now, you're not saying, oh, I stopped the war. It's, I stopped the war for 5 years. I stopped the war for 6 years. Like, for example, if Abraham Lincoln, when the Confederacy seceded, like, was able to get a quick ceasefire, that doesn't solve the issue. That doesn't make the Confederacy come back into the Union. If you don't solve the issue, all you're doing is kicking the can down the road, and definitely in Russia's case, you're buying them time to fix all the problems. Because the thing is, the reason Russia had so many failures here wasn't only because they underestimated Ukraine, but was because they overestimated themselves. And the more time you give them, definitely when they're not being pressured by the Ukrainians, is more time they get to fix these issues and try again when they're better prepared next time, and they have a better estimation of their own strength and of Ukrainian strength and of the international community's support for Ukraine. So that's the first reason. The second reason that the violence doesn't stop is, even if they were to stop the wars from continuing, period, like they created like this perfect agreement that meant Russia would never invade again, and the occupied territory they have now, they have engaged in horrific brutality, executions, rape, just torture, and honestly, we just heard from when it comes to children, it feels particularly touching for me, at least. It really has an impact on me. We're getting reports from Kherson that these places that like adopted, what are they called? Like places where they have adopted children. What are they called?
Orphanages.
Orphanages. The owners of orphanages and the caretakers for the children would hide the children when the Russians came by, because the Russians would take them and deport them back to Russia. Because they don't have parents, nobody's going to come looking for them, and then they can bring them to Russia, because now they're taking these people who are supposedly Ukrainian, but they're really Russians. They're just confused, and they can give them a proper Russian upbringing. And hey, it's technically not deportation because they annexed the territory. And so that led to a lot of children being deported and quite literally stolen. And so we're getting to the point where people are hiding children in floorboards, hoping the Russians don't take them away, right? That doesn't stop because you signed a peace deal. And I think for some people, they don't understand, definitely when we're living in the safety of the United States, when we've got the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean separating us from anything, a million different geographical reasons why we're impossible to invade. We're the most powerful nation on the planet. We haven't really faced a real threat like that since the Civil War. It's impossible to comprehend, I think, that there could be certain things worse than war. Subjugation can be considered by people who are subjugated as worse than war. There's a reason why we fought an independent struggle in the United States, why the Algerians fought an independent struggle, why the people in the Congo fought an independent struggle against colonialism, why the Vietnamese did, why many people did. It was because that subjugation was worse than the repercussions that would come from rebelling against their government. And so just because like war is bad does not mean that you need to immediately stop war if the consequence is that you have an even worse situation, or you're just delaying the war for later. So I feel like a lot of people whose desire is to save lives, they don't realize that for Ukrainians, a peace deal right now that enshrines these territorial annexations is like signing your neighbor's death warrant. You get to save some Ukrainians, not the ones still in occupied territory. And so when you see these videos of like liberation in Kherson, of these children getting to climb out from under the floorboards, of these people coming out and flying the yellow and blue flag after the Russians claimed that they evacuated the whole city, but then the city streets were still full of people, the Ukrainians who were waiting for the government to come back, and the footage is honestly heartbreaking of how much they cared about liberation. I remember this one quote, it was along the lines of, we don't have electricity, we don't have water supply, the Russians looted everything, but I'm in a free Ukraine, and that's all that matters right now. I feel like that is what Ukrainians are fighting for. That's what this war is about for Ukrainians, and to them, like that's something worth the struggle. and they're winning. Why when they can have more footage like that created through the liberation of more territory, whether it be Lysychansk or Severodonetsk, Mariupol eventually, why they would stop and just give up. And so I think that a lot of people are really missing the mark when they say, oh, we need to stop the war right now and and just accept Russia's terms to end the suffering. You're just making the suffering different. You're just creating a different type of suffering, and you're making the suffering permanent.
I mean, yeah. I mean, for me, it's just like, it's even so simple as just who started this and who could end it. Like, I know that there are people who, even in my chat right now, are like, there's a go back and forth right now. There are certainly bad actors on the Ukrainian side, absolutely. And some people are also bringing up, the Donbass region and what's been going on. But what's been going on there has been like, what, 9 years now, 10 years now?
8 years. It's been 8 years. It's been going on for 8 years.
2014, right? So that's 8 years in.
I've been to the Donbass. I went to Kramatorsk. I went there during the Russian offensive in the area. It was the last major city the Russians wanted to capture. The whole time we were there to film a dog shelter. And it was really weird filming the dog shelter because these dogs lived in really squalor conditions. But the thing is, like, who is going to take care of these dogs on the street who are getting injured by shrapnel or have been abandoned by their families fleeing the war? The fact that anyone is doing it at this point, when this is literally a frontline city, is incredible. I've been to a few dog shelters in the war, and that one was particularly squalor conditions because of how close it was to the fighting and how many people had run away. But while I was in the city and I talked to people, the conversations I was having was of real fear. When people talk about these Russian speakers in the Donbass, it is true that everybody I talked to over there, they spoke to me in Russian, or I had to get translators to go back and forth in Russian. But just because you speak Russian doesn't mean you want to be part of Russia. If you were to go to Ireland and say, wow, look at all these English people, they're all speaking English, why aren't they part of England? Why aren't they part of the UK? You're disregarding like a big part of why they speak English, which is that it was forced upon them. The reason a lot of people in Ukraine speak Russian was because Ukrainian was banned. It was literally banned during the Russian Tsardom and was still treated as kind of a backwater hillbilly language during the Soviet Union. And so just because you speak Russian doesn't mean you want to be part of Russia. You can speak Russian and still be culturally Ukrainian, identify as Ukrainian. And all the conversations I remember I had a conversation with a 60-year-old man. He was drunk as fuck during midday when there's shelling going on. And I'm like, okay, well, I can understand. Out of all the reasons why somebody could drink, this is a pretty decent reason. And I was interacting with him, and he had this gold tooth. He was a character, right? And the whole time he was just the drunken stupor. We're trying to get away from him at the end of it, basically. Like, he leaves the fuck alone. And I'm like, well, if he's gonna be here, I ask him a question about, like, what do you think about the Ukrainian language? I see you're speaking Russian, and he gets super serious out of nowhere. It was like as if the alcohol just left his body for a split moment from the heavens. And he said, I speak Russian here, I speak Ukrainian here. And he pointed to his heart. And what he was trying to get at with me was this idea that, like, I was never taught growing up to speak my mother tongue. I was never taught these things growing up because that was disencouraged or was seen as bad. And I think a lot of the cultural nuances of the Donbass and of Eastern Ukraine are kind of lost, because when we talk about even you can talk about like the far right in Ukraine, right? The most anti-Russian types, most of them speak Russian. Like Azov is largely a Russian-speaking organization. The Azov Battalion, which is like, if there's like an organization you could say is not favorable towards the Russian government, it is them. And so I think a lot of people like will point to the Donbass and the fact that so many people speak Russian, and they'll not understand that just because you speak that language does not mean you want to be part of that country's government. I mean, the American Revolution is another example of this, right?
All right. Yeah, that's a good example, right? That right there is probably the best one to bring up, right? I like that. That's pretty good. Oh man, I am. Oh wow, we've been going for a while here.
Yeah, I've been going for a while.
I like this. We're going But this was a great conversation, honestly. I really we hit so many topics here.
We did hit a lot of topics. We did hit a lot of topics. That is true. Hey, do you I gotta start pushing my content more. So do you want to hear an interesting war story? I gotta start pushing these more.
Please, let's hear this.
Because I have so many and I never know how to bring them up in conversations.
So you're not in Ukraine right now, correct?
No, but I'm going back in January, February. I want to do more frontline filming. I want to do like a week-long in bed with soldiers, like fighting.
Well,
like
stay safe, man. I know you said you had some close calls.
I mean, yeah, I've had a few close calls. I got shelled while I was in Mykolaiv. I've got like chased by drones and shit. But it's you know, I'm still alive, so it is what it is. I mean, the thing is, I believe very fundamentally that and this is a very it feels almost virtue signaling in a way. I believe that if you believe in something, you need to believe in it fully. Did you see the recent like news in Qatar about like we're gonna wear this armband to stand with queer people? Oh, you're gonna be fined. What armband? I'm changing armbands actually to this new version that's a little more watered down. We don't like that one either. Okay, well actually this one just says racism bad. Can I wear the racism bad one? They just kept watering it down because none of these people actually wanted to like take a stand for like something they believed in. I believe fundamentally you need to commit yourself like entirely for something, like entirely if you believe in something really. That I must contribute myself even if it like puts your own life at risk to some degree. I think it's a good thing actually for a human being to believe in something so truly and so ultimately that they're willing to put their life on the line for it. And I believe Ukraine is definitely one of those things for me, at least.
Right. There's a question here that from someone who seems to not be a fan of, your and sort of my position on this too, I guess. Matt asked Dylan, what will happen to the pro-Russian people of Donbass who voted in the referendum? Do we accept them getting exterminated by Nazi volunteer militants? Well, for one, that referendum is bullshit. Second of all, listen, I've said it before, just in this conversation, they're without a doubt bad actors in Ukraine. And certainly the United States should take a role when ever this does end, if Ukraine hopefully does maintain its country's survival. The U.S. needs to then step in and say there needs to be something done about these bad actors, these neo-Nazi contingents in the Ukraine. And yeah, that should be taken care of. There's no doubt about it. I don't know anyone who denies that there's an issue with some, especially it seems almost maybe even mostly in that region with there's neo-Nazi contingents there without a doubt. I mean, there's also neo-Nazis in Russia.
I think I've met, while I was there, I met a lot of soldiers. I think I met one that I know for sure is a Nazi and one that I was like kind of had suspicions of, but they're not everywhere. The closest you can get to like seeing them everywhere is right sector, which definitely has Nazis in it. I saw their office while I was in Lviv, and they were playing like some weird far right music, and I think that was like an example of it. And there's usually Azov shit everywhere, but people just look at Azov. They don't like Azov because of their politics, because the political party of Azov, like, it's a failure. They like Azov because they fought to the death in Mariupol and they sacrificed everything. It's a very different reason as to why they liked it. And so I think that difference should be distinct when we talk about Azov, is that Ukrainian people don't like Azov because some of their members are very far right. Not all of them, I will mind you, but some of them definitely are, and it is a legitimate problem. They like them because of what happened in Mariupol. And I think that is something that does need to be clarified. That it's like, I think a lot of people think that the Nazi problem in Ukraine is like one in every four like Ukrainians deny the Holocaust or something. But we're talking about a determined but small group of people here, where we are talking about a very small percentage of the Ukrainian military as a total whole. And this isn't particularly that strange when it comes to independence struggles. If you look at, for example, the opposition to the Japanese invasion of China, you had hardcore far-right nationalists fighting it, and literally Mao Zedong. And they even like made peace deals in order to stop fighting each other in order to fight the Japanese invasion. This happens in a lot of independent struggles where people of all different political stripes, even the very, very bad ones, will basically say, look, we all agree in one ultimate enemy, and that's the invasion force. That's the like imperialists or whatever. And so this isn't even that historically insane as a concept that this is happening. But I will say, like, yeah, there are, like, we can't deny that the Nazis exist, but this premise that this person laid out, this idea of like, oh, they're gonna execute all the pro-Russian people. I think I have one story that I can like tie this into. I had gone to the Donbass. We were on the way to Kramatorsk, and we had to stop because it got too late, and our route out was being shelled. So we had to stop because if we went, we would have gotten shelled. And by the way, Ira, thank you so much for the raid. While we were there, we met this medic. This medic is fucking insane. He doesn't use a gun. He just uses a combat shield. And so he'll run into battles, grab people who are injured, and drag them away because he's religiously against it. He's religiously against the use of firearms. And this guy was a god of the gab. Okay, it wasn't Michael Tracy, but he had the god of the gab, and he went on and on all night telling stories, which I loved as a reporter. It made my job easy, right? And I haven't released any of this footage yet, but later, because I was in the Donbass, and you know, the Donbass, according to international press, is historically very pro-Russian. I asked him, like, what is the amount of pro-Russian support in this community? And he tells me, like, I don't, in this area, like maybe 1 in 10, like I would say. Probably maybe 1 in 10, which is still like tremendously low. And I'm like, oh, okay. What do you think will happen to them after the war? And he said, like, collaborators will be dealt with. And he was specifically talking about like people who like work with the Ukrainian military. And so I do think that there's a risk that like people get their hands on the person who gave the Russian government, say, like a kill list, or a list of their neighbors, or snitched on people, and they do something fucking horrific to that person. There's a risk that happens, just like there was a risk that, like, remember what American soldiers did during the liberation of like certain concentration camps, what they did to like prison guards and they like, shot them, or how the French police or for like French resistance fighters, when they caught collaborators, they killed them. That is something I am worried about, as I would be worried about any independent struggle, and that should be monitored. But I highly doubt that they're going to go door to door shooting people just for having tacitly voted in an election or forced to vote in an election. I find that very suspicious. I think my main concern would be, what do they do when they catch the people who help the Russians round people up? Because that's when it really is a test of human will to like hold back and allow institutions to pick up these people and process them so they can have proper punishment. That is a real test of human will.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Let's see. Is there any other questions there? Left is Best says, at least Matt Binder decades from now can proudly say he was on the side of neo-Nazis. Okay. All right. I mean, you want to act that way, feel free to act that way.
Banderites. We're Banderites. We're a Left is Best Banderites, of course.
I mean, I couldn't make it any more clear that the Ukrainian, the neo-Nazis on the Ukrainian side, let them die. Let them die. And in fact, if the ones that don't, something should be done about them. When the war is over, they need to be at the very least expelled from any sort of official capacity.
The military.
Yes. I mean, but literally, that's what military is in literally every country, though. There are neo-Nazis in every single military, in every single nation across the globe. That's the truth.
It is true. I mean, there was actually neo-Nazi plots from within the military. I think it was foiled in 2018, 2019, where a neo-Nazi wanted to give information to the Taliban so they could kill American soldiers under the idea that it could destabilize the United States if like there was like enough of a tragedy or something. Like there are even neo-Nazis going within the American military and multiple militaries around the world under the idea of that they're going to get training and they're going to use this training to do horrific things. But that does not mean that if China invaded the United States tomorrow, we would say, well, we should give up California because of this guy from 2019. Or, well, did you know that when America was literally like all hands on deck, that 0.5% of the military is made up of the far right? Honestly, I would say for a war of this, which is a war of survival, I have generally been pleased at the lack of far right attitudes I've met and encountered while in Ukraine. It's there, I've seen it, but it's not as present as the media makes it out to be, and I think it's just because it gets so much attention. It feels. Well, remember when Matt Walsh was on Joe Rogan's podcast? And he said 1 million children have gotten like mastectomies, and then they googled it and it was 1,000. That's what it feels like when it's with Azov, because the media talks about it so much. People would think there's like 1 million neo-Nazis in Ukraine.
Right. I mean, this has been my take, and I think I might have told you this last time we spoke, and you could tell me. You know, your how accurate you think this could possibly be. But the Azov Battalion, you know, the main neo-Nazi contingent of fighters in Ukraine, have been active for those 8 years we previously discussed, literally fighting in the Donbass region against Russia. And so, being that is the region that has seen the most fighting, and in turn, even during this time around, this year when Russia invaded Ukraine, that has also been the region that has been the most war-torn, being that they are there and have been fighting, and that is their home, and then that's where the war is, and so that's where you get all these journalists and photographers going there to take all these pictures and stuff and report on what's going on there. There is an outsized presence of them in this specific area compared to the rest of Ukraine.
I would say I definitely saw more like far right I would say elements when I was closer to the front line and when I would say more out east. But it's still, again, it's still small overall. I think a lot of it's also confirmation bias. Like, nobody's going to remember the million different, like, eagles or, like, wolves to represent this and this and this army division. Everybody's going to be like, I know that symbol. I've seen that in the media. And so I think a lot of it's also confirmation bias. But I do think that some of it could be because, like, a lot of these organizations are regional. And Azov particularly, I think, has gotten so much attention because Azov's fought for 8 years. So a lot of them have 8 years of combat experience, right? They were there since the start. And so a lot of people view Azov as kind of like this elite fighting group. And if you ask a Ukrainian, this is how they're going to talk about it. That, oh, Azov is the elite fighting group that's been fighting for 8 years and put it all on the line in Mariupol. Very little bit when people talk about Azov has to do with politics. There is the founder of Azov, who is a far-right, like, neo-Nazi type, did split off to create his own political party. It's just been a failure. And so that's why I find it hard to believe that, like, general feelings about Azov or Azov's existence is going to translate into like Ukraine becoming a Nazi state when there seems to be like no general interest in that whatsoever. And there's like no far right policies being introduced. The far right parties are largely failures. I think Svoboda has 1 seat out of 450 in the Rada. I think people make it a more outsized issue than it is. Not to mention, can I also say, the Russian government has neo-Nazis fighting on their side. Rusich, which is a private military company, is a neo-Nazi organization. The Wagner Group was founded by a neo-Nazi who has SS and neo-Nazi tattoos all over his chest. Literally the swastika, German eagle, everything. And he's the founder of the Wagner Group, which hasn't only fought in Ukraine, but Syria, throughout Africa, all these other locations as well, and have been accused of things like murdering people with sledgehammers as a form of punishment, which they just did in Ukraine. And their fighters like published blogs about like the Kherson occupation when they were still there, and they were talking about how these dirty, and they would like start using slurs for Ukrainians. They spit in our direction. They hate us. Every single time we give them their money in rubles or pensions in rubles, they exchange it for Ukrainian hryvnias. They won't accept payments in rubles. They'll only accept payments in the Ukrainian currency. I hate these motherfuckers. We need to ban the Ukrainian language here. We need to, like, they have their own neo-Nazis. And so my question to everyone is, so is the plan to use neo-Nazis to denazify neo-Nazis? So Nazis are going to go into Ukraine, to get rid of the Nazis, to get rid of the Nazism. Is that the plan? So, I mean, this is like having Joseph Goebbels like fight Hermann Goering to like save the Jews. Like, what's that? That doesn't work. They both hate the Jews. There's not gonna be there's no solution here where the Nazis like go away, because these people would be the ones who would maintain an occupation force as they have, and they have committed horrific war crimes as well. So it's just like, I don't think this war has anything to do with Nazism whatsoever, because if it did, why is it that the Russians are using Nazis to conduct military operations?
Oh, of course there's nothing. Anyone who thinks that what Putin said early on about denazification or whatever is bullshit. Couldn't have been any more bullshit. I mean, I don't honestly, I don't even know who believes that's what Russia is doing besides like simps for Putin. Honestly, I don't get that at all. You want to like be obsessed with like the Joe Biden or Democratic support of Ukraine and the money spent. I mean, I disagree, but I get it. I get that at least. You want to, talk about, that there are Nazis in Ukraine. I mean, you can totally do that. But if you're not also talking about the Nazis on the other side in Russia, then you're a bullshit artist too. So if
I would just say, like, if you were to look at the ideological makeup of Ukrainian soldiers, I've met communists, I've met anarchists, I've met run-of-the-mill liberals, I've met conservatives, and I have met Nazis. Very few Nazis, but I have met them, and very few communists as well, because it's Ukraine, and they don't view communism very well. But the thing is, it's the only thing that's consistent amongst the people who are defending Ukraine is that they're Ukrainian, because it's a uniting national thing. No matter who you are politically in Ukraine, there is a desire to get rid of the occupier, to get rid of the imperialist who's coming over to impose their own rules, their own regulations, and has denied the existence of your people. If you were to basically tell a country to go into survival mode, and a people, which is what's going on, a people to go into survival mode, they're going to throw everything they can at you. They're going to take anarchist battalion, sure, why not? You're Stalinist? Oh, you're Pol Pot from the grave? Sure, you go over there. Neo-Nazi, you go over there. They're going to throw everything at the wall. And that includes the Azov battalion. I mean, that's the thing is, the Azov battalion was created in 2014, when Ukraine was on the ropes after the Russian invasion of Crimea and what was going on in the Donbass. It was created in a time when Ukraine was the most desperate, which is an indicator, again, I don't think of political support for Nazism, but out of a desperation to survive as a nation state.
Yeah. I mean, you're spitting facts here. I think, like, listen, this is my best case scenario. The Nazis on both sides take each other out, and the Nazis on the Ukraine side, in going out, help end the war, and Russia leaves. Ukraine maintains its sovereignty, and all the Nazis are lying unconscious and dead on the battlefield. I mean, I don't care about the Nazis other than I don't want them there or anywhere. I want them to go away in the most brutal, horrible way possible. So, I mean, the idea that, like, saying that Ukraine has a right to exist somehow means you are defending neo-Nazis is just the most bullshit argument. It means you don't want to even have a conversation about this very serious thing. Even if you look beyond any sort of politics, any sort of, even if you look beyond like what you were just saying, Dylan, about the different political ideologies that you've come across there, I'm thinking about the innocent children and the mothers and the fathers who are completely not involved in any aspect here, just going about their life, their everyday life, and they are in a war. They are stuck in an, it's just how that's not the focus for any of these people is beyond me. And the only way those people will be safe, and I'm talking about in Russia too, the people who are being sent to their deaths untrained for a war they don't even want to fight. The only way good, innocent people will be okay at the end of this is for Russia to leave. And giving up on Ukraine will not in any way push Russia to leave. Only the opposite will happen. More innocent people will die.
I feel like I've seen a lot of this, and I saw it too with Qatar as well recently. it almost feels like a weird form of nationalism, but people are trying to like make it sound kind of like a little bit wokish in a way. I don't know how to describe it. In Qatar, it was kind of like with the people are criticizing Qatar for being homophobic. Someone says, how dare you criticize their culture, right? There's very hardcore, like culturally relativistic, like this isn't your business. You know, this isn't the type of thing you should get involved. This isn't an issue that concerns you. And I have seen from like Brianna Joy Gray and, you know, some other commentators, this kind of like left-wing pitch of like, this isn't our business. This is our money. We need to spend it here on, you know, the American homeless, crippled, black trans vets that are whatever the issue is in the United States. So we shouldn't be spending this overseas and enriching the military industrial complex. And what I don't understand is how all of a sudden people who are willing to like jump on a Medicare for all and like all these gigantic spending plans, all of a sudden when it comes to stopping children being kidnapped from their homes and dragged away and deported and mass graves being filled, all of a sudden the pockets dry up in the richest nation on the planet. I find it bizarre. Like where did this kind of like nationalist angle of it come from? I don't understand. Like these are people that I would have expected to be someone like more international in their worldview. We live in a 21st century. We live in a global world, right? I would really hate it if the end of human development was when we see nations get invaded or genocides happen. We just say, tough shit, we got our own problems. That would really suck if that was the end of human development.
Yeah. I don't know. It's so bizarre to me how this. I mean, it's really weird to me. The sides that come out on the, you know, when the Russia's invasion of Ukraine comes up again. If you are someone who is critical of certain aspects, I probably agree with you in those aspects. If you're someone who literally thinks Ukraine is just full of neo-Nazis and is rooting for Russia or something, like, unbelievable. And if you're someone who takes it a step in terms of like the idea that like just leaving Ukraine will solve it, is also just I don't know. It's just very, I don't get it. I guess you're just not, if you're just a non interventionist, that doesn't even make sense, because it's like, listen, honestly, when this first started, this is what I was my deduction of this, and I still believe it. People are so used to American intervention meaning that we're the bad guys, and that's accurate.
Yeah.
That they can't even believe that in this one case, we're actually on the right side.
The thing that I think that gets people is intent. And this is the argument I hear all the time. It's like, well, even if we somehow are on the right side, why are we really there? We're not there to help people. We're there for Ukrainian resources, or because we don't like Russia, or any of these other number of reasons. But I always try to explain to people, the reasons nation states get involved in war are extremely complex. And part of the reason I think there's so much aid going over to Ukraine is because the moral argument is so strong. And it's popular. It is popular to send aid to Ukraine, which is a wild thing to say. If you were to say after the invasion of Afghanistan that in 1 year, the majority of American public would be asking for military aid to be sent overseas, it would call you insane. But because of how strong the moral argument, even after the withdrawal from Afghanistan, the American public think it's our duty to be involved in this way. And so I do think that intent from the American public does have a significant impact, but I'm sure the military industrial complex, them making money and stuff like that, also has some role to play. But I would never say we shouldn't do the thing that is the correct thing, the morally correct thing to do, that would save the most lives and have the best impact on the world, because people I don't like would benefit. As in the military industrial complex, they would make money. Since the beginning of man, as long as man could sharpen rock, okay, man has been selling sharpened rock to beat other man to death. Weapons have always been sold for profit. So when calculating this type of like foreign policy dilemma, I don't really think like the profits of the military industrial complex or the intentions of one particular senator or a group of particular senator should be like a major priority in determining whether or not we should support it for moral reasons, if there's a good reason to do it.
Yeah. I guess that's the most that's all I have to say at this point about that topic. Honestly, it's, you know, because it's funny because I see some people in the chat who are anti majority report, bringing up, oh, the neo-libs of the majority report coming out here. I'm actually the only one, like, this is actually where the majority report gets into one of the few areas where the majority report audience disagrees with, like, the majority report crew. Like, I am the only one in the majority report who actually has these views on the war in Ukraine. You know, I went at it a little bit in, you know, just friendly disagreement, but, you know, we went back and forth a little bit with me, Matt Leck, Emma, Brandon, and I think the next day Sam was updated because there was a whole thing with the audience disagreeing with Matt and Emma. I mean, I'm the voice here on the majority report that feels this way. I'm not saying they are, you know, as spouting the same stuff others are, but they have criticized this way more than I have. I mean, I think, honestly, again, maybe it's because of my background and my long history covering white supremacist groups and neo-Nazis and far-right figures. I see what's going on here, and I know, I get what's going on here, and it's not what people are trying to make it as. I mean, I would like to think that for anyone who knows me and how I've been literally on this beat of covering these, you know, these far right movements and reactionary movements for over like a decade now, know that if there's someone who knows about neo-Nazis and doesn't side with them, I'm one of those people.
I think it's something, an interesting way to look at it also is when you look at the American far right, including like American white supremacists, who do they support in this war? Who is what the vast majority of them support? If you tune into Nick Fuentes' stream, he's going to tell you how Russia is conducting a war for Christianity in Ukraine against the trans, against the gays and the homos and the liberalism. And if you listen to like certain Chechen commander, and there's video of this online, I'm not fibbing, where they're literally telling soldiers before they send them off to go die that, hello, you know, we need to stop our kids from being corrupted by the homosexuality and the trans. And so we're going there to fight the shaitan, which means devil, in Ukraine. Like, people are going to go and die in a war with the last words they ever hearing is, hope I don't make my kid, we got to stop my kid from being gay. We got to go fight and die for that. And there's a reason why the American far right seems to have so much sympathy for Vladimir Putin, not only due to his own views of sexual minorities, but also due to his views on generally supporting the international far right, which is something that he likes. He wants the international far right because not only is it because he agrees with them ideologically, but also it creates instability. The Foundation for Geopolitics is a book that's, I don't give Dugin too much credit for being a major influence, but Alexander Dugin did write for the Foundation of Geopolitics, which is taught in Russian military academies. And in this book, it says explicitly, and again, this is taught in Russian military academies, that a goal should be to cause racial unrest in the United States under the guise of unseating it from its position of power. Because if there's a race war, or if there's race riots in the United States, that could allow Russia to fill up power vacuums that America would need to, you know, let go of, and you know, the power vacuum America would leave as it turns inward. And so I think when we talk about like the threat of Nazism and the threat of the far right, we ultimately like hyper focus on Ukraine, but what let's look at the international far right. How do they view the conflict? Why are there far right supporters and volunteers on the Russian side as well? Why are there so many American far-right commentators that seem to have sympathetic views of Vladimir Putin or even outright support him? And like Tucker Carlson, who said on his show explicitly that he is a supporter of Vladimir Putin.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I don't know. Again, if there's maybe I'm not explaining myself well, but that wasn't an attack on the majority report. That was me actually defending
So
them
Matt,
from the
now
people
that you're leaving the majority report, have you ever thought of getting employed with Dylan Burns TV?
That was me defending them from the people attacking them for being like neo-libs on this topic. They're actually, if you want to call it, to the left of me on this. That's what I'm trying to say. I mean, I don't think that's the way to put it, honestly.
I despise the idea that the more involved in international affairs you have America, the less left-wing you are somehow. I mean, acknowledging the existence of the global world is not left-wing. It feels silly.
I look at it this way, like the last good war, and good war as in good we got involved because it was a worthwhile thing, was World War II. Should we have sat idly by while the Nazis, where Adolf Hitler's Nazis exterminated the Jewish people, the Romani people, the LGBT community over there? Should we have sat idly by while these minority groups were decimated? No, we can't always. Should we be the world police? No, not that either. But there are times in history where something needs to be done because something is so brutally wrong that unfortunately outside actors have to get involved. And I hate to say it, that the U.S. in a lot of cases is one of those countries that need to get involved. And again, very few. I'm literally going back to World War II as the last time it was necessary. Every other war after that has been bullshit. We were the bad guys. We're not in Ukraine. I wouldn't advocate for any U.S. soldiers to go into Ukraine. I think what we're doing now is the most we should do in terms of aiding them, in terms of supplying them with what they need to make sure their country doesn't disappear tomorrow.
I would even say that you can make an argument that supporting a country in a liberation struggle is a truly internationalist kind of left-wing. I think you can make the argument easily that's a left-wing position, supporting a people's liberation against an authoritarian government invading its land with the explicit goal of erasing the Ukrainian identity. I think you can easily make the argument for it. I think some people just hear like guns and bombs being sent anywhere, and they immediately mean, okay, so that's the right-wing thing. You can fight for a left-wing or a good cause and not be a right-winger in fighting for a cause if the cause is righteous, and a liberation struggle is always righteous.
All right. I mean, hell, we should have been doing the same thing for like the Kurds.
Absolutely. And Myanmar is another example of something we should be doing this.
With these same detractors be on the left, would they be saying the same thing if we were doing that in a country like this? Like it's again, I think this conversation is good to have, and I also think that the broad left needs to realize that just because we disagree on certain things doesn't mean we are enemies or something. I mean, the right has disagreements on a lot of things, but they all come together at the end of the day to extract as much, to export as much pain on minority groups as possible. So, I mean, we can disagree on this and have quibbles about this and still not hate each other. I mean, although they're obviously the who Michael Brooks had called the dumb lefties, I think they're not the same. The ones who are actively pro-Russia.